Hello, and welcome to today's Augustana Human Library session. The title of today's human book is Becoming Eli, and this is this human book's abstract. I will not be bound to your simple gender binaries. While still finishing my studies to become a clergy, I shouted that across the meeting of church people from across the northwest portion of Saskatchewan. Over the 20 years since, I have searched for a way to understand and talk about my gender identity.
So thank you for coming to read my book. The phrase I chose to use to give my little summary comes, I want to set the scene. It's 2002, and it is somewhere in rural northwestern Saskatchewan. I'll say, because I don't remember, I'll say that we were in North Battleford. But we're in a large church hall, and there's about 40 people there. I am probably the youngest by 15 years. Well, maybe no, that's not fair. David would have been there, I'm sure. No, I'm at the wrong time. I'm probably the youngest by at least 15 years. I'm a student for ministry in the United Church of Canada, and the people who are gathered are mostly little church ladies. Let's say little church ladies. They're mostly women who are very active in the life of their congregation, to the point that they've been elected as the representative to come to this meeting. And we're having a conversation about a rather boring topic that's making sure that there is equity representation when with the people that our little region, which happens to cover Rosetown up to Meadow Lake and in towards Outlook and that kind of thing, Kindersley, that our little region is sends a balanced representation to the national gathering of the United Church. And so they have to keep track of the gender of the people who are going, as well as their ages. And when they put this information up, I call out to the whole group, I will not be bound by your simple gender binaries. So there I am, 25 years old, candidate for ministry in the United Church. If I hadn't said that aloud at that time, I don't think I would have believed that I would have thought that at that time. My name is Eli Carter Morgan. I identify as non-binary, and so the best pronouns to use for me are they and them, but I'm also not the gender police. I was born in Kitchener, Ontario, 1977. I'm the youngest of 4 children, and I was named Elizabeth Ann when I was born. When I was little, I'm the youngest of 4 by quite a bit, I'll add. They used to tell me that my reflection in the window at night was Annie Bet. And so when I was little, for some reason, I got picked up that, like a bunch of other people in my family, I was known as Annie. Not only when I was very little and by some members of my family, although my recollection of being called Annie comes from my aunt who lived out of town, and I wasn't going by that name anymore, and I might have been 5 or 6. Because when I went to school, they had to decide, what to call me, and they had been calling me, I'm sure they called me the baby, and then they called me Elizabeth Ann quite a bit, but as more casually, they called me Annie Bet, or they called me Annie after my reflection in the window at night. And then they shortened it down to Elizabeth. So I went by the name Elizabeth through until about grade 7, when my friends started calling me Liz, and that suited me for a very long time. It allowed me to become Liz the Les, as I came out as being attracted to women, and that also felt like good fun and was actually a lot better than, it was a reclaiming of, you're not going to make fun of me because of my name. This is who I am, and if you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. I think that's a piece of growing up, when you reach that point of being able to say, if you don't like who I am, that's your problem, not mine. I don't think that gender ever meant very much to me as a child. I had a lot of friends who were both girls and boys growing up. I it would have been important to me to be considered as good at computers and math and science as a boy. And it seemed ridiculous to me that so many girls pretended not to be good at math and science when they got to high school. But I found the dividing being personally being divided out by gender always felt a little bit awkward, especially as I began to, um, for one thing, I essentially went through almost a double puberty because, from a medical perspective, I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which means that my body produces just a little bit more testosterone than it should. Now, I have two older brothers, and both of them had full beards by the time they were 15. So I had to shave my face every day when I was in high school, and my voice dropped uh, to the point that I can comfortably sing tenor. And with those two factors put together, I would sometimes be perceived as a boy. Although I kept my hair long, I also learned that having long hair meant I could also tie it back or hide it under a ball cap really easily. And then I would be perceived as a boy. And it always seemed kind of, hey, look at this. People, they're not seeing me. But I feel like I was getting away with something? Not quite. There's a phrase called gender euphoria that some people use in the transgender community to mean when people finally get it and you finally are seen as your true self. It's you're happy. It's there's a medical term, gender dysphoria, that's used in helping to diagnose people who are seeking to medically transition their body to to suit their gender identity. And it's this feeling of euphoria when, aha, they understand, they see me. And when I was having these moments of people misgendering me supposedly, had a glimpse of that. But again, you've got to remember this is the 1990s, and we didn't really have any language to talk about that. So you fast forward um, through 4 years of undergraduate, including 3 years of Bible college, and after that experience is done, I'm completely ready to start a coming out process. And I recognize that gender identity seems to play a part, but I can't quite figure out how. I'm not confident that I'm a trans man, and there doesn't feel like there's a lot of space for me to experiment with being a trans man at that time. Now, I've spent most of my life, including the really important coming out times in my life, in in small or smaller urban centers. So I wasn't really going through a coming out process when I was in Camrose, but I lived in Kingston, which is a city of 100,000 in Ontario, when I was doing a lot of my coming out work. And I was in Brandon, Manitoba when I was after that. So in that time period of the first 10 years that I was out, a lot of it was spent in smaller communities where there's just one LGBTQ community. There isn't, I can't go and find the other trans masculine people to see if I can't figure out exactly how I fit into the spectrum of trans masculinity. That is somebody who identifies as crossing gender binaries in the direction of masculinity. So I kind of floated in a sense with that. And I never really had there's a real drive, at least there was for me, to coming out at certain stages of life, and a real need to seek and do work with that. And sometimes it's there and sometimes it isn't. The next time, to the same degree, the next time I found myself really able to start working on and asking this question, I had been raising these issues within the United Church and beyond of non-binary identity, or not knowing the biggest single challenge to me as a person who doesn't fit comfortably into the gender binary has always been public washrooms. I don't know how old I was the first time I was told, excuse me, this is the women's washroom. Or I do remember very clearly one time walking out of a public washroom and some man coming up to me and being like, "Hey, bro, you're in the wrong hole." Like, what the? Okay, I'm just gonna move on from that. I don't want a violent experience, and I've never had a violent experience, but I know that they happen, and I know that the potential exists, and I just wish it would go away. So I've often found that when I'm around people that I know and who know me, I often will use the women's bathroom because that doesn't seem to be a problem. Women don't seem to be uncomfortable, who know me, don't seem to be uncomfortable sharing a washroom with me. Men who know me sometimes do. Women who don't know me feel uncomfortable sharing a washroom with me, and men who don't know me usually don't. And this is complicated by an added layer of the fact that I now have a 10-year-old son with waist length hair. So that makes public washrooms all that much more fun. But yeah, as I was saying, the point when, and so I talked about that aspect particularly a lot, and did a lot of work trying to figure out what what my gender identity was, or how it was best to address me. But there were no categories as we get into the, the early, 2010 kind of time frame. But I was approached to be on a national committee working for making the United Church of Canada more accessible to trans people, and particularly the ministry more accessible to trans people. And they had a hard time finding trans people who were out, and I guess they decided, because I was always talking about not knowing what my gender identity was, that they would put me on this committee. And that was the first opportunity I had to really interact with trans men. And that really helped me to realize that I really wasn't a trans man, because I often thought, oh, maybe I'm a trans man, I'm just not ready to deal with this. But as I'm interacting with trans men, it's no, I'm not. There's a space between genders that, for a lot of binary, I'm throwing around a lot of language here, and because I can't see you, I'm not sure if I've got you or not, which is a bit of a strange experience. Um, so binary trans people, so people who were identified as one gender at birth, and say that they are another gender, and they are very clear with that. So I mean, trans men are men, trans women are women. And so if for them, the period of being in between, when it's their body is in transition with new hormones, but they haven't had surgery and more advanced treatments yet, and they're stuck. They feel this is a terrible place, and I feel like sometimes I feel like it's a desert, and I'm the strange hermit who lives under the bridge in the desert, the strange little bridge gnome that says, "Oh, welcome here. I'll just guide you through this territory. I've been living here for years." That I just don't fit into these categories, but I can't. There wasn't a lot of language for it, so I talked a little bit about being gender queer, but for a long time we didn't have that category at all. And it's only been quite recently that it's shown up. And so I found myself with this identity, sometimes working with teenagers who were at this point 30 years younger than myself, and realizing that they're able to access some of this language and talk about it. And it feels like I'm the oldest non binary person around. Well, that's okay. I can work with that too. And I got to be part of this committee that saw the first openly trans person ordained, and that part of the outcome of that work was saying that it used to be the official language in the United Church after much contention that almost broke the United Church apart. 1936, it's called the Basis of Union, the main governing document for the church, said that the order of ministry is open to women and men, and this was huge in 1936. But we had a change made, which it seems so small. And the biggest worry was that people would make the change and not realize how big it was at all. But they changed it to say people of all gender identities. The order of ministry is open to all people of all gender identities. So that created an extra space of safety. So now I want to talk about becoming, the whole topic of the whole talk, becoming Eli. But I began to reach the awareness, in some ways not too far off of when my children were born, which kind of put a pause on everything, because when you've got little kids, you don't have time for anything. That I was going to want to make clear that I have this different gender identity. But my life seemed to have a lot of chaos in it. And I also knew that at some point in time, I would want to change my name to something that was less gendering, because people would be confused or uncertain about my gender, and they'd hear my name, and they would then feel like they have the whole picture and they know who I am. Now, I would say for me, when people don't know my sex, they don't know that I have ovaries, and then they find out that I do have ovaries, it feels like they have a lot more personal information than I think it feels like for most people. Because to me, my gender is, I'm agender. That's how I identify myself. That I don't feel that the category of gender has any meaning for me. And so when people want to put me into a gender-based category, it doesn't feel like it fits me. It's like asking if I cheer for the Oilers or the Flames. Oilers, by the way. But I'm not really a big hockey fan. And so they asked me, do we cheer for the Oilers or the Flames? I don't really care. But I live in Edmonton, so I guess I cheer for the Oilers. And then they're like, oh, you're an Oilers fan. And they paint me in blue and orange and take me on the parade. I'm like, I don't think you understand. I'm not really into that. And it would, that's how it feels. To me, it feels sort of like as a person with a uterus and ovaries of a certain age, it feels like telling people when I'm on my period. It feels similar to telling them that I'm female. And I'm not entirely sure, because I've never been in a male body, but it might be sort of like the information about whether or not you're circumcised. It's just that's sort of between me and my reproductive endocrinologist. You don't need to know about that part of me. It's kind of private. And so having a name that assigns a gender immediately makes me feel like I'm telling more of my personal story than I want to, just by giving people my name. So when I began in 2014 in Camrose, I came there at a time when there's quite a bit of upheaval in my life, and I had 18-month-old twins. And I was not ready to claim a new name. But deep inside me, I knew what that name was going to be. And I chose a story to be told as part of the service when it's like a wedding between a new minister and a new church. And we have a service, and I picked the story that's going to be told. And it's the story of the boy Samuel in the temple. And Samuel is a child who has the responsibility or honor of living at the temple and helping out the old priest, whose name is Eli. And And one night, Samuel hears a voice calling his name, Samuel, Samuel. Samuel assumes that it's the old priest Eli asking for some help, and he goes up to him and says, "Yes, what is it? I heard you calling my name." And Eli says, "No, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." And just hear him, "Go back to bed." Well, then a little while later, Samuel hears the voice again, "Samuel, Samuel." And again, Samuel comes up to Eli and says, "Yes, you called me. What can I do for you?" And again, he's sent back to bed. Well, the third time, the old priest realizes that this is something else going on and says, "It's not me calling you, it's God. When you hear that voice, say, 'Here I am.'" And so the boy goes back to bed. And when he hears the voice again, he says, "Here I am." And the message that he gets from God is ultimately about a great change and transformation in which the way of being that things that had been for the old priest would be no longer, and a whole new thing was going to come about. And I felt such attraction to the story of Eli as the one who makes space for the boy Samuel and the new thing that's going to happen. I chose that story when I started my ministry in Camrose. And I chose it again when I started my ministry in Virden, Manitoba. The calling, the calling of Samuel and the midwifing role of Eli, the old priest, and realized as I'm moving into midlife myself, I'm 45, that um, that I want the second half of my career to be dedicated to making space for the new things that are emerging. And I want to be as open as the priest Eli was to having the world transformed around me. And so I knew that that would be my name. But making a change like that is hard. You know you're going to bring grief to the people you love. I'm incredibly grateful to my older sister, who is probably the only person who was really willing to articulate that grief. That we had been the two girls, we had been sisters, and she doesn't have a sister anymore. She says she still has three wonderful siblings. Well, we'll let the wonderfulness of my brothers stand on their own, but it was a change, and knowing that I was going to be asking that of people, and including and especially I was going to be asking that of people in the church. I felt like I did not want to make that transition until I was in a time of transitioning between communities, because asking people to call me by a new name would likely lead to forgetfulness, people forgetting and being confused and being embarrassed, and other people trying to come to my defense and rescue me. And those are all things that I could have found a way to deal with, and lots of people do. But I knew that my life would have these times of transition and starting at a new church. And we sort of knew when we went to Virden that we would probably be there for 3 to 5 years. So I got this gift of time that we all got in the pandemic to get myself ready and sorted. And when it was time for me to move, it was time for me to change my name. And I've been saying for a long time that I didn't care what pronouns people use for me. And if I'm going to be really honest, I still don't. But the best pronouns for me and the ones that make me feel seen are they and them. Because that way, my gender identity is not being revealed every time people talk. And it is far too easy, it seems, for people to revert to using she, her pronouns all the time. And it often feels like they're not really seeing me. They're saying, "Oh, you're just a tomboy. You're just a girl who dresses in boys' clothes." And that exists, and I'm not that. And when people can take the time to see that it's really me, that makes a really positive difference. So I when the time came to make my announcement that I was leaving Virden and coming back to Edmonton, I decided to tell a shortened version of the story I've told you today, and said that um, that I was going to be starting to go by a new name and using new pronouns as of July 1st, when I started the new job in the new place. So when I've got these two email addresses, right, and I'm still using both of them actively because I don't want to try and change my Apple ID, like, and everything, everywhere you go, you pull up to McDonald's, and it's like they're still calling me by my old name at McDonald's because I haven't bothered to change the app. There's just so many places to make the transition, but that was my day for making the transition, or so I thought. But the people of small town Virden, Manitoba, its claim to fame is it's halfway between Winnipeg and Regina on the Trans Canada Highway, was the number of people who started using my new name, my new pronouns. It just warmed my heart. My fellow scouters, you see, when you're in a town like Virden and you don't play hockey and your kids don't play hockey, the scouting troop is about the only place where you can really go and build good community for your kids. And they just enveloped us. And they seem to have a realization of the possibility of scouting being good for people who are more transient. And so they knew that we wouldn't be there for long and they welcomed us anyway. And the other scouters started using my new name. And what a way to be seen and heard, that people will make the effort. And the moments that have absolutely melted my heart have been when people have bothered to try. I don't care if people make mistakes. It's a new learning. We use the singular they all the time. Someone left their phone here. But using it for a specific person is new, and it takes time to learn a new bit of grammar, and to longer, I think, to understand a new concept of people living outside of the binaries. That it's the first question we ask about a child when they're born is, which of these two life categories do they fit into? Heard a little comedy sketch not too long ago where someone said that it was a little bit of that scientists use their very highly scientific method to predict a person's entire way of being and existing in the world by doing just a glance at their genitals at birth. And of course, I'm not funny like that person was, but that that, that it's hard to break out of those categories and say I don't fit into either of the categories that you have there. But the moments that have shone for me, I went to stay at my sister's house, down to back to Ontario to visit my family, and went to stay at my sister's house. And I could tell that they'd been practicing because my sister and my nephews and my niece-in-laws and everything, they were all using my new name and my new pronouns. And they even managed to adopt my I can be their auntie, because it's like uncle and aunt put together, aunt. And I can, and they tried. Of course, they made mistakes. And once my sister couldn't get my attention, and she finally used my dead name. That's the word to use for the name that someone doesn't use anymore. And it worked. It was really effective. It's a learning process for everyone. And I think in some ways, one of the biggest and most meaningful things of all to me, I worried so much about my parents. Not that they would have a problem. They've always been supportive and they've always known that I was not quite fitting in with gender. And they were I was worried that I was worried. Talk about this one over with your therapist. I was worried that they would be upset, especially that my mother would be upset that she was getting if she got it wrong. And she's older and she has a lot of memory problems. And I know that she's not always going to get that right. But I could tell she worked hard and she practiced and she got it right. And she called me by my new name and she hugged me and she said that she loved me. And I think, okay, so an 85-year-old woman with memory problems and like pretty severe short-term memory problems, if she can figure this out when other people tell me they can't, I know that there's a question of will. And I think that we can all make this easier, because I've come through this as an adult well established in my life, and there's a lot of kids who are going through this with all the other angst of being a teenager, and it's hard. But practicing and using new pronouns and new names, even if those pronouns and names change every other week, help somebody be seen and help them feel that moment of gender euphoria when they're finally seen as the person they are. So I haven't talked for a full hour, but I did want to leave lots of space for questions because I'm very comfortable talking about any of this. And I know there's terms and language that I have no idea what's familiar and what's not for people.
You see that one in the chat there? Knowing what you know now, would you still become a pastor? And if yes, would you still be drawn to the United Church, or would you start somewhere different?
I would still be a pastor, and I think I would. Would I still be in the United Church? I spent 3 years at a Mennonite college, and if I wasn't a pastor, I'd probably be a Mennonite. But there was no way that I felt that I was called to fight for women in ministry, and that's what was happening in the early 2000s with Mennonites. So I'm talking about conference Mennonites here. There's a lot of different kinds of Mennonites out there. They're sort of like Lutherans in Camrose. You can be almost any kind of Christian and be a Mennonite. But no, I would. And the United Church is in a time of great transition right now, but it's the church of my childhood. I think it would be where I would stay.
I was gonna, when you were talking about the church and language, did you say it was in 1934 that they changed that language from man, woman to any gender identity?
Men and women was 1936. Any gender identity, we voted on that. It was during the pandemic that we voted on it, and it finally came into practice, officially into play in, I think, 2018 or 19. It wouldn't have been, and it felt like a non-issue to most people. They're like, didn't we decide that when we decided to ordain gay people? It's like, not quite, but I can see that people feel like, okay, now this is the path we're on.
Sure. And lots of, which I know is not the same, but there's certainly parallels for you. Lots of anti-trans everything, rhetoric, posts, hateful kind of stuff. I mean, you would have the skills to talk with those people, to have a respectful conversation, because I mean, I think pastors have to deal with all kinds of things that people think differently about. But how do you help other people? I guess maybe, because like you just kind of made reference to, the difference between gender and sexuality can be easily confused until somebody basically intentionally says, I'm going to learn what some of these things are. I'm going to try to figure out what pronouns, like what's the issue with that, and why I should do it, unless there's some intentionality on it. It doesn't just happen. I think it's my opinion, because there has been a lot of change in the last decades. So
how do you help people for whom this isn't, right in front of their face every day, um, respond to some of the stereotypic jokes at the water cooler, or you know Facebook posts, because it is, to me, kind of the new big thing to bully or tease about, and certainly to minimize any individual, like, really to their core, as being not um, anything different than how you were born, that kind of perspective. So um, it feels like, in order to gain some wider understanding and acceptance and stuff, just does mean a lot of people have to have that intentionality. So you have a position that might allow you some of that structure. um, do you feel that that's something people actively want to understand more, talk about more, or is it for them maybe more just about you and understanding where you kind of fit in the world and your perspective, and that's kind of good enough until they need more?
I think that sometimes when you know somebody, it makes a big difference. And apparently, if you want to start a fight in a in a LGBTQ group, you say that non-binary is trans, and some people say it is, and some people say it isn't. And I haven't been in one of those groups to have that kind of conversation to know. Not, I don't want to cause that kind of trouble, but the reality is that anybody who is transgressing those gender bound borders is going to be affected by all this new layer of anti-trans rhetoric. And so hopefully on one level, my just existing and refusing to not exist to make other people feel more comfortable helps to make transphobia uncomfortable. Like, make it awkward when people are being transphobic, and challenging the I think one of the big things right now is saying that story time with a drag queen is some kind of, what are they calling that? You're trying to groom children.
Mhm.
And there are so many layers of that being wrong. And I think one of the things that people can do to counter that version is to challenge it when they hear it. And I mean, whether it's having those a few pieces of information in your back pocket, like in Shakespearean times, all the actors were males, so everyone at that time was exposed to drag. It definitely is nothing new. And to realize that somebody dressing up as a princess and reading a story to little kids, if you think there's something wrong with that, you need to kind of examine, and we'll find out what it's about and examine it, because you're really spreading terrible misinformation about people. Um, it, the and I think you're asking about more than just the story time with the drag queen. Although story time with the drag queen is definitely amazing. There's kind of people who are anti-pronouns. How can you be anti-pronouns? We use them all the time, but that people put the pronouns in their email at the end of their email, where they have their I don't know words. I don't have the right word. You know what
Email
I'm talking about.
signature. Yep.
And that people are bothered and offended by this. And I think that just the same ways you use your email signature to say how you want to be addressed, you put on a name tag to tell people how you want to be addressed. A part of that is that as soon as you try and talk about somebody, you can't do it without pronouns, without it being really hard. We in the United Church did learn how to do this when we decided to not use pronouns for God. And we did that for about 20 years, and we're slowly moving back into using pronouns again a little bit. You can construct your sentences to avoid using pronouns. And a lot of people, my current church, they find it really hard to use the they them pronoun, so they just use my name over and over and over, which is
Yeah.
it's great, but sometimes it's a little bit like, why are you avoiding this? Why can't you can say the word they and them and practice? Just put some sentences together and practice saying them. Um, Practice saying them. I've started putting little notice in the bulletin every week that will just say, talking about myself in the third person, like Eli will be in extra meetings this week, so if you need to contact them, uh, don't hesitate to leave a message on their cell.
Yeah.
But don't give me gift cards. I don't want gift cards. And if you do give me gift cards, never, ever, ever scratch off the part on the back, because that's my favorite part. That scam's going around. Helen, by that, the minister of the United Church in Cameras, was just hit by that. Somebody pretended saying that she wants $600 in Walmart gift cards with the back scratched off.
So Joanne put in the comments, thank you for helping me understand the pronouns then. Sorry, Eli?
Yeah, want to encourage people to practice using people's pronouns. And people say that they're against pronouns. I think it's just sometimes it's a matter of just being curious and trying to get to the bottom of what they're really uncomfortable with. And I use the analogy, if you meet somebody whose name is Robert, and their name is Dr. Robert McIntyre. Do they want to be called Dr. Robert? Your university setting, right? Do they want to be called Dr. McIntyre? Do they want to be called Rob or Bob or Bertie? They want to be called Dr. Bertie, Dr. B, Dr. M? And I think that when you use your saying, what's the polite way to address you? And especially in an intercultural context where we don't necessarily know the names that people use from other countries or cultures, along with people whose names are ambiguous in their gender, it really helps. It can help facilitate easier communication. Helps you find the person you're looking for, maybe.
Well, and I was thinking about this minute earlier, and you were talking, like, I mean, as a culture, we've very much bought into, gendered stereotypes about. You mentioned you had longer hair when you were younger, that you have a child now with longer hair and a gender that many people might not think should have longer hair. I currently have 3 young nephews with quite long hair, and it messes with people's heads. So we've made these kind of rules that we're supposed to live by, and some people are more willing to reconsider that and think, why do we care about this? And others feel, I'm guessing, a bit threatened with the change. And I guess it can be kind of interesting to sort of watch people's reactions to those kind of things when it doesn't fit into the boxes we've always imagined.
Mm-hmm. That's for certain, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think giving people the freedom to realize that you can be a short-haired girl and a long-haired boy, and you can be a boy and wear nail polish. My daughter loves putting nail polish on my son, and he's a really good sport about it. Not that I want to hold him up as some kind of particular example, but for whatever reason, I've raised both my kids, and my daughter's really kind of stereotypically feminine female girl, and my son is he's got a lot. He's again with a bunch of boys, and he acts like he's with a bunch of boys. They all act like a bunch of preteen boys, but he doesn't fit every category, and I think none of us do. And when people, somebody like me shows up like a bull in the china shop, destroying all the gender stereotypes, I hope it gives people permission to step outside, and even when it's a little thing. Um, Maybe they've grown up with an idea that says that they're not supposed to bake because of their gender, or they're not supposed to garden because of their gender. And you know what? If you want to have a hobby, have a hobby. If you want to play with trains, play with trains. There's
Mhm. It is surprising how pink and blue stores still are.
Mhm. And they're getting more so.
Yeah.
So many products are being like when I was growing up, soap was soap, and toothpaste is thankfully still toothpaste. But now your soap and your shampoo are gendered. Uh, I and so many products. I think it's good that the awareness about breast cancer and everything, but do we need a full set of pink tools for women? Like, I
Mhm.
think it's fine for people to use whatever color tools they want, but yeah, I've seen that whenever there's something that's transgressing gender borders, it often over genders to compensate.
Mhm.
Oh, you're a girl playing football, so we're going to give you a really girly football. That might not be the best example because I haven't really seen a really girly football.
Well, the
Um,
tools is a good example though, because they're also always lower quality tools because there's no way that a woman is going to do, you know, actual things with a tool. It's decorative to have in your kitchen drawer to, do light work.
mhm.
Hmm.
And yeah, and when you see the assumption that people of certain genders can't accomplish certain tasks, I spent a bit of time in the ER, not about anything serious, but there was a man there with his little tiny baby, maybe 3 or 4 months old, and I'm just watching this guy take really good care of this very attentively caring for this baby, and then we think, is this unusual? Like, am I noticing that he's being really good with this baby because he's a man, or it's just it's also really nice to see somebody being very
Mhm.
attentive. And you wonder all the questions. Why is the man there with the baby? Well, who knows? Maybe he's adopted the baby. Maybe the baby's mother had to work. Like,
Yep. And yet we do seem to still have in our heads that knowing the answer to some of those scenarios matters, and it really doesn't. The fact that he's kind and caring to the baby is all that should matter.
hmm,
But we very much
exactly.
in our society still describe people like, I was at the bank and the teller that helped me was, of this cultural descent or this gender or whatever. We rarely will say something like, it's the one with the red top on. And I think all of that kind of pattern has to shift a bit to, to sort of allow some the flexibility that's required to truly be willing to understand that changing is helpful for people's wellness and fullness in their lives.
Mhm. And
Does oh, sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, does anybody else have any questions? But carry on.
I was just going to continue on the theme of the people in the bank and that there's we kind of have this idea of normal and whatever makes somebody less normal. And why is it that we think of the normal way of being as a person being a certain gender, a certain color, speaking the language a certain way, like saying that someone doesn't have an accent? I have a very English Canadian accent. If you're really talented at picking up regional dialects, I still do some of my Southern Ontario vowels, although I intentionally learned to do prairie vowels as an adult, and I usually do them without thinking about them now. But compared to somebody who speaks English in Australia, I have a very pronounced Canadian, probably it sounds American accent.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
It's not normal to speak English the way I do. It's normal for me, but normal is just a setting on the dryer.
Yeah.
So I am not offended if I don't. It's 11:54. I'm not offended if I don't take the full hour. I hope it's been interesting or informative to read my book.
Yes, very much so.